Good evening, everybody. Joe Metalhead here. Hope you're doing well. Coming to you from the kitchen, where I've got a steaming hot bowl of mac and cheese. And the interesting thing about mac and cheese is I tend to realize that it's not really just a Western food, but it's eaten in the Caribbean, eaten in Africa, eaten just all over the world. It's like a global staple. Which brings me to today's topic. What countries have been so close to visiting, but I've not ended up visiting there? Okay, this is quite a good topic to talk about, okay? You know, I was born in Australia, lived there for 30 years. I only ever went to the eastern coast states. Never went to Western Australia, South Australia, or Tasmania. I did go to the Northern Territory once to get a flight to East Timor. I spent so long in Australia, but I never bothered venturing into the Pacific Island nations because I knew it was going to be expensive. Like literally my trip to Papua New Guinea many years ago, that cost me at least 700 Australian dollars, and it was like 550 Australian dollars on a 2-day return flight, which fucking Australian customs were criticizing me for taking a trip, and I literally told them, gave them a two-finger salute, saying, I don't like your country, you're a piece of shit. And that's why I don't live in Australia anymore, because Australian customs are dogs. Right over. So, I've pretty much been to a lot of countries between the United Kingdom and Australia. There's only a gap of a few countries in Central Asia that I've never been to, or Pakistan or Afghanistan. Once I go through Central Asia, I'll literally initiate a complete route straight to the UK, you know? Okay. In Southeast Asia, I went to a lot of countries. I was supposed to go to the Philippines, but then I got really sick in Borneo with so-called... I can't really remember what I had, but literally I had no appetite, I was feeling really sick, and I literally thought I had pneumonia or some bronchitis. I am quite prone to getting respiratory illnesses, so I was scared shitless, so I went back to Australia. So I ended up going to the Philippines, and actually I was supposed to go to the Philippines a few years ago, but I ended up cancelling my ticket because I was going to go see Metal Church. I was supposed to go to Japan 10 years ago because Hellbringer went there and then Lord went there. I was going to go to both Korea and Japan, but at the last minute I basically cancelled the flight until July the following year because I had so much work to do. I was between jobs. I had a new career change where I wanted to stop being a kitchen porter and I wanted to start being a waiter. So I eventually didn't end up going to Korea in 2014, even though I had flights to go, because I was quite too busy with my work, and it was a quite painful 17 months in Australia of not leaving Sydney, and that's just so hard on me, and I kind of regret of some of the stupid things I'd done in that time frame, which we'll talk about in another video. Yes. I was in India for a couple of days, and then I went to Nepal, but I never really gave myself the opportunity to go to Bhutan. I knew I could just travel to the Bhutan-Indian border, which would take 22 hours, but literally India was just such a really crap nation to visit and travel in, and it was just so horrendous. And Bhutan is always going to be expensive. They're always going to be asking $250 American a day because they don't want to be like Thailand. I mean, I know some friends of mine who have been to Bhutan, and it is a nice country, but it's not really light on your wallet, and you basically, I hate how some countries are oh, you have to have tour guides, you have to this or the other. Yeah, I understand that's the case in North Korea, and that was the case in Gaddafi, Libya. But I'm kind of a guy who wants to, overland it from India to Bhutan, look around, come back. Yes. I've been to the UAE twice, but I've never given myself the opportunity to go to Oman. The UAE is a really extreme heat country, and I tend to avoid going to those types of places in the Middle East because it's quite hot for me. Even though in winter, I guess it would be less cold. When I was in Southern Africa last year, I had 30 days to go to as many countries as I wanted to. So, I went to South Africa, Lesotho, Eswatini, Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. I could have gone to Mozambique. I was looking at getting a visa, but I found it was dumb how the embassy, High Commission in London was charging like 60 quid, but then it was going to only cost $50 on the border. I knew there was going to be a lot of corruption and a lot of bullshit, and I have a South African friend of mine who flew into Mozambique many years ago, and as a South African citizen, you're not supposed to pay money to get into Mozambique, but the scumbags running the border that day were demanding money from her. So she rang up the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that I gave her phone to the immigration officer. So he basically said in Portuguese, stop screwing around with her, she's a South African citizen. Yeah, and also, Africa is always going to have its corruption issues, so you literally have to know when you need a visa and when you don't. I've been lied to in Senegal and South Africa, just because of visa requirements, and I know the visas from the back of my hand, come on. Look at me, I always go through visas like a fine tooth comb. When I was in Central America, I had 2 weeks to travel from Cancun, and I thought I was going to go all the way to Panama, but then time would restrict me because I had a flight to go from San Jose back to Cancun and then a flight back to Birmingham. So I couldn't really push into Panama City. I was thinking of just trying to push myself over the border into Panama and mark it off, but then literally I was really tired after so many days on chicken buses and tikka buses and all that. So I literally thought I could do Panama on my own time. As a matter of fact, if I'm really going to go to Panama, that means I'm going to go to Colombia and other parts of Latin America. When I was in Guyana 4 years ago, I spoke to a friend in Grenada how I could have flown to either Trinidad or Grenada or Barbados from Georgetown, Guyana. I was going to get paid while I was in Guyana, but then literally I thought, look, that's $300 for a couple of days in Barbados or Trinidad. I thought, it's not really worth it. The reason I didn't go all the way from Georgetown, Brazil, is because it takes a whole, 24 hours to go from Georgetown to Boa Vista. It's a really hardly extreme road. It's not as good roads as going from Georgetown to Paramaribo to Cayenne to Macapa. So I decided to go to Macapa and to mark Brazil off. I was supposed to go to Ghana and Iraq 3 years ago, but that didn't happen because I had my British passport locked up during the lockdown. I couldn't go anywhere, couldn't even go back to my own country of birth, Australia. I tried going to Iraq in November 2020, but because the idiots working at Pegasus Airline, they had to basically cancel all the flights to Iraq. Iraq was open, Turkey was open. I tried overlanding it to Bulgaria, but then some lying piece of shit was telling me that Bulgaria was closed, so literally I thought, I'm not gonna make it to Iraq. I've literally been to every country in Europe, but I can tell you that I have hardly seen much of Finland or Slovenia. I drove through Slovenia many years ago to get to Croatia after getting on a bus in Switzerland. I think Slovenia is a really nice country to visit. I should have gone back earlier this year when I was in Croatia, but I thought, I got a £10 flight from Pula back to London, so I had to make do, I had to get back to work. As for Finland, I took a cheap ferry across town, but then I only had a few hours to get on the ferry that was going to Stockholm, so I literally just spent some money on a taxi to drive me across town to all the different ports to go from one port to another. So I'm not seeing much of Finland, but I have been on Finnish soil. It was nice. I was supposed to go to Barbados in 2020 at the start, way before the pandemic, but Thomas Cook went bust. So I had a flight to Barbados and I couldn't get on because the airline went broke, so I got my money back. I was supposed to go to East Africa 4 years ago, but I canned that so I could go to South America, and then yet again I was supposed to go to East Africa this year, but because of the stupid incident at work, losing my jaw, saying dumb things, I felt into a really bad depressed state and I didn't want to bring myself to East Africa. So I didn't really go. I was supposed to go to Tunisia last year, but work had a huge big fuck up. I told them I wanted time off to go visit a special friend of mine up north, and then I'll take 3 days off to go to Tunisia. Because of this screwbag idiot who hired a dumbass who was really rude and insulting to me, I basically had to make a choice. Do I either just go to Tunisia or do I go up to Stafford? And I went to Stafford to see my good friend. But I didn't feel bad that I was cancelling a trip to Tunisia, because the funny thing was I already booked flights to go to Nice, but then my flights to Nice were cancelled, so I got my money back, and I ended up going to Banbury so I can make a vlog on Sandy Denny and Ronnie Barker. I was, in Senegambia like 2 years ago, and I had plans to go to, Mauritania and Guinea Bissau, but because of having to deal with racist vermin scumbag on the border with Senegal lying to me, scamming me out of money, saying I needed this authorization letters, I was just so sad and depressed. I flew out of Senegal the next day. I felt wanting to be racist to those border guards who were being racist to me, all because my nationality is the United Kingdom. And they basically just, I've said this before, okay, they lied to me, they said I need authorization letter, they said there's no such thing as visa-free for British citizenship, which is a load of BS, and I'd already read up all this bunch of stuff. So, I know I could get thrown in jail if I was a racist to somebody in Africa and I used the N-word, but literally, if somebody in Africa was demanding money from me, I would have been like, F you, you disgusting racist vermin. You think me as a white person, that I am a walking ATM? For God's sake, there are white people all over Africa, and they don't have European passports, or the right to go back to Europe. So, you need to stand up to a lot of these vermin who will try to scam money out of you, not just in Africa, but all over the world. There are always going to be corrupt officials who want to fuck with you, who want to take your money, who want to create so much BS. And this has happened to me in Senegal and South Africa. And crazy enough, it happened to me in Kazakhstan, a country that specifically said, do not bribe us. So, yeah. I mean, being from a Western nation, there are privileges that you can visit a lot of good countries visa-free, but then again, there are always going to be poorer countries who don't have much tourism, who basically think that a Westerner could give them some more money. And, there's always going to be scams about, so you have to watch about. Yeah. So, many years ago, I told myself that I was going to spend more time in London than my cousin, John, who I didn't really get along with, and I was going to go visit more countries than my cousin Michaelia. And I eventually did that. Then my mom told me, well, man, you're wasting your time. I'm like, no, I didn't waste my time. I achieved it. I wanted to better myself than my cousin who's been to a lot of countries, and my cousin who spent 5 or so years in London. I just wanted to outdo that. I don't rub it in their face and say, oh, I've been in 96 nations and I've spent 6 years in London. But there's going to be a time when I come back to New Zealand and I'm going to be like, you don't believe I could stay in London, 2 figures, up yours. But, seriously, like, if I ever get the chance to go back to Australia, and probably stay there, I will work so damn hard just so I could go visit all those little tiny island nations. I always say to people, mate, forget Australia and New Zealand, they're overrated. Forget about it. Check out Kiribati and Tuvalu before, what happens to global warming. It's gonna, raise sea levels and they might not exist in about 60 years' time. Anyway, Martin Metalhead, over and out.